Well, hello there, HW here. Thank you so much for watching Tone Junkie TV. I get this question all the time. HW, how do you profile amps? What do you do? Where do you do it? What equipment do you use? So I thought it'd be cool to show you. So today is a little bit of it's a vlog video, and it's a day in the life of a Tone Junkie on profiling day. So I'm just sitting here making sure everything's working before I head over to the studio, but we're gonna grab the Kemper, some various other pedals and stuff, and we're gonna get down here and do these guys. So the studio that we use is just about 10 minutes from my house. It's actually built into a house. Once upon a time there was a house in this huge piece of land, and the church bought it, built a big church on it. And then the house got converted into offices and this studio. It's awesome. So I'm going over there right now to meet Sooze and John too, and we are gonna make a day of profiling as we enjoy doing it. Let the profiling begin. Here's HW's little desk for the day. This is where I type in all the funny named profiles. This is where one of us sits and is productive.
Yeah.
Nate, what are we profiling?
This is the super spunky.
Really spunky.
Really spunky.
The really spunky.
And it really does bring the spunk.
Okay, so if you've never seen the profiling process, this is it. I've got the amp mic'd up in the next room. Over here, there's some pre's, and then it all gets summed together down here. And then, boom, reference amp, Kemper amp. I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to tell it to start profiling. And this is what it sounds like. It's like an ocean.
Calming waves.
Calming waves. It's like the apocalypse. Or a machine gun. Boom. And it's done. I'm going to hit refine, and Nate's going to play a little bit.
Yes.
Okay, so one thing that's really important when profiling, you've got to be able to hear exactly what the microphones are hearing. If you've got a loud amp blaring in the room, I've talked about this a bunch, but you get so much reflection off the wall and everything, you're not really hearing the amp. And so if you're sitting in a room with an amp and you put mics right up to it, the mics are like ears. They're like ears sitting right next to the speaker. So if you're 5 feet, 6 feet up in the air, 3, 4 feet if you're sitting down, and you're really close to that amp, you're hearing something a lot different than the microphone. So I think it's really important that you have some way to segregate yourself from the sound of the amp, right? So we use this sort of little vocal booth that has kind of been converted with a bunch of moving blankets and insulation and stuff to be like a little isolation booth. So down here, you can see I've set up the, what do we call this? The extra spunky, or very spunky. That's what we're going to call this. And I've mic'd it up here, and I've got the microphone positions right here. I've mic'd it up with our combination that we use is Fathead, Cascade Fathead 2, and an SM57. And I'm gonna silence it a little bit with some more foam. I'm gonna put real close to the amp so we don't get any reflection in the room. And then I'm gonna go back to the desk, and I'm gonna be able to monitor the sound without having a bunch of amp room sound bouncing around and clouding what we're actually hearing, while we're profiling. Okay, back here at Casa de Tone Junkie now, this is where I would come back and listen to the profiles and sort of smooth them out. And what I mean by that is I always try to make sure that profile sets are sort of even in brightness, and they have a very logical, sort of change, kind of sort of an EQ curve. As you increase the gain on a tube amp, usually bass increases, right? And you also tend to want more mids as you increase the gain. So some amps do that beautifully by itself. Other amps, you actually find that it sounds better increasing the mids as you increase the gain. So this is where I would come back and listen to the profiles, and maybe on profile 3, I felt it sounded great in the studio, and then I lowered the bass and made profile 4, and there's too much of a bass jump there. So that's where I might back off a little bass on maybe profile 3, just so it evenly, sort of, you hear the bass and treble evenly moving through the profile set, and you don't have profiles that are darker than others or anything like that. This is also where I might go into the amplifier section and dial in some of these parameters here. If you have any Tone Junkie packs, or you download the free pack, or anything from profilecrate.com, you might notice there's some parameters I tend to dial in the same. The compressor, to me, it's not one that I feel needs to be changed a lot from amp to amp. I tend to feel that between 1 and 2 on the compressor value in the Kemper helps the feel of the Kemper just really nail a real amplifier. I think, especially as you get tube amps loud, there's a level of compression, whether that's the amp circuit itself or the interplay between the strings and whatever. I just feel like it feels more authentic, and so I usually set that compressor to around a value of like 1.5. Depending on the amp, I'll have the clarity up above 2, or sometimes down at 1, and the clarity just sort of fine-tunes the high end a little bit. It almost sort of smooths out some of the high end, and it doesn't add brightness. You'd have to play around with it to hear it, or you can watch the Tone Junkie YouTube channel has a bunch of videos on different parameters in here. But this is when I would do that. I might even make some little EQ changes to the EQ stack itself. I might make a cabinet change, very rarely, but sometimes I do that. And, this is where you make sure all the profiles sound good together. I'll often grab other guitars and I'll dial it in with this guitar, and then I'll grab a Telecaster and see if, is the high end okay, really on a bright telly bridge, or I might grab a Strat and go, is there enough bass for these thinner Strat sounds? Things like that. So here's a profile called Really Spunky 3, and it's moderate. It's a cleanish profile with a little bit of breakup, and this is a bright amp, Fender kind of bass circuit, kind of like a Princeton, but with a larger power section. Sounds like this. And to me, it's pretty important that the brightness, the bass, sort of matches, profile with more gain. Sort of, you want it to feel like the same amplifier just turned up louder with more gain. I get a lot of questions about equipment that I use or techniques that I use to capture amps and profiles, and I think there's been some people who have said some things that sort of imply that there's some secret technique you need to employ in order to get authenticity out of the Kemper, in order to get the Kemper to really sound like an amp. I just don't believe in any of that stuff. I don't believe in secret microphones or this preamp or this technique. You either believe the Kemper accurately reproduces the signal that it's given, or you don't. You either believe that the profiling process sounds like the amp being profiled, or you don't. I mean, that's just sort of it. In regards to equipment and things, I've shown you a lot in this video about what I use. I don't really know anything unique that I'm doing.
People have been miking guitar amps and using microphones to capture music and guitar sounds for so long. There's all sorts of techniques out there. Whatever technique you employ, as long as that's what you enjoy, that's the sound that you're after, that's sort of what's important. I haven't really run into an amp or something that I felt like the Kemper couldn't capture it. And I don't believe that's because I've stumbled upon some secret, magic to success with the Kemper. I just think it reproduces what you give it. I really don't even know anything that I'm doing very unique in terms of miking technique, other than I will say I'm a believer that when you're listening to a speaker, you're hearing the frequencies from every part of that speaker. And one of the drawbacks to using microphones, right, to reproduce anything, is that microphones are often pointed, especially dynamic microphones, are often pointed towards a very limited sort of sound source or a spot on that sound source. One example of that would be conventional wisdom would tell you that an SM57, if that's the only mic you're using, you would turn it away from the center of the cone to sort of even out some of those highs. You're getting a lot of highs from the center of the speaker cone, and that microphone is kind of bright by itself. That's a sound we're all used to, the SM57 sound. And when you're using that mic by itself, you really do have to get away from there and tame the highs. One thing I do that might be a little bit unique is I'm not afraid to either put that microphone dead center or put it just off the cone a little bit. And for me, really allowing the SM57 to do what it does best, which is produce those upper mids and the treble in a way that we're all very used to. We all are very familiar with the sound of an SM57. And then mix that in with the sound of another microphone. Use a multi-microphone setup like we're using, and allow the bass to come from somewhere else and allow the highs to come there, and then control the level of that microphone in the profiling process in order to sort of tame the highs and only have as much as you need. I attribute that technique to just some of what people have described in the Tone Junkie profiles as kind of sounding lively or amp-like. I think it's just that we're used to the sound of the center of the cone. And so if you're too careful to avoid sort of the harshness of the center of the cone because you're not really mixing the microphones together well, you can miss some of the frequencies, some of the information that's in that speaker, moving back and forth. In regards to parameters, the Tone Junkie YouTube channel is a wealth of knowledge in terms of, we have videos about the definition control, the gain control, the EQ, pre and post EQ, the cabinet section, all sorts of stuff. I really don't think there's any real secrets. I mean, the manual has a ton of information. You can find more online. I just describe what I hear these parameters doing and kind of what they do. I've experimented a lot. Some things work really well, some things don't. I think one general rule with the Kemper is less is more. A lot of times small tweaks have a big effect. Now, saying that, I think at the same time, I am as guilty of this as anybody. I may have at times communicated to people in my videos that maybe I've told people to be too cautious about turning knobs. And I think there's a lot of attitude around the Kemper that if I turn knobs, it changes the sound of the amplifier. Well, it does, but that doesn't mean it doesn't sound authentic. Whenever we're recording amplifiers, whenever we're recording a guitar sounds, we're using other equipment other than the amplifier. We're always using preamps, we're always using mics, and every record you hear has some sort of a mastered, EQ on it, some sort of change to the guitar sound. So I don't worry that much about being too authentic in terms of if something works for you in the context of a mix or a band, if changing some parameter here, if boosting the mids way up works, you should go for it. Don't be afraid to not sound like that amplifier. That's no more different than turning on a mid-boost pedal, and we all do stuff like that. I've been HW. Thank you so much for watching Tone Junkie TV. If you have any questions, put them down below. I'm happy to answer them. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram. You can find us all over the place. And anyway, I'm just happy to see people discovering the Kemper. And I'll just say this. I have not been shy about recommending other profilers. I love Michael Britt stuff. Absolutely makes some of my favorite stuff. Mix Berlin has some great free stuff. I love their cleaner pack stuff. Sayla Sounds makes some incredible stuff. There's a whole bunch of other people out there making really great Kemper profiles. Find somebody you like. Find someone whose technique to you sounds like how you want your amp to sound. Bert M, another great guy. Mix Ready Profiles. And, thanks so much for the support. I've been HW, Tone Junkie. Peace.